I did. Okay. I should be recording now. Few housekeeping rules first I'd like to go over. Please stay muted until after the presentation and only unmute if you're asking a question at the end of the presentation. If you have any questions during the presentations, you can always enter them in the chat box and we'll cover them at the end of the presentation. So hello and thank you all for attending. This is the first in a series of presentation called Heal Talks. I'm Ellis Fitzwalter, Executive Director of Heal Stop Heroin. And next to me is my lovely wife, Patty, President of the Board of Directors. Also in the audience tonight is Landon Robert of Prevent Ed, who also sits on our Board of Directors. And you'll have to forgive me while I'm talking here a little bit. My neighbor decided to cut grass tonight and he's getting close to the office window, so it may get a little noisy here. For those you don't know how Heal started off as a grassroots organization, which quickly became a 501c3 in 2018. And as of 2021, we have been recognized as a coalition by the Missouri Department of Mental Health. Heal was formed after losing our son in 2014 to a mixture of Xanax and heroin. Next month, May 19th, we will be having another speaker series, and we will be having Jim Marshall, a retired coach and the director of Cody's Gift. Also, don't forget on April 26th, we will be hosting an overdose education and Narcan training. And I've got that the registration links posted in the chat box, as well as our Facebook page and our web page as well. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our first guest, Anne. And I'm sorry if I butchered the name, but I'm going to give it a shot. Mastroianni is
Mastroianni.
Okay, thank you. Anne is first a mom of four and a grandma of four. She has been married to her husband, Tom, for 45 years. They have three daughters, Christy, Katie, and Maggie. They had a son named Matthew for 32 years. They have four grandchildren named Izzy and Grace and Sam and Lucy. Anne is an RN and has been practicing at Mercy for 45 years, mostly in labor and delivery. They have lived most of their married life in Kirkwood, but since then relocated to Chesterfield due to their son's death in their previous home. She is passionate about mental health and drug addiction awareness. So at this time, go on and start sharing your screen, and we'll get on with the presentations.
Hi. My son, Matthew Mastroianni, was an addict. Addiction is defined as a chronic relapsing behavior in the face of negative consequences, the overwhelming urge to continue something you know is bad for you. Addiction is an intractable disease driven by a complex network of biological, psychological, and environmental contributors. It is such harmful behavior, in fact, that evolution should have long ago weeded addiction out of the population. The use of drugs has been recorded since the beginning of civilization. Life with an addict with an addiction is like walking around with a ball and chain shackled to your leg. It travels with you everywhere, keeps you from reaching your full potential, and controls your life. Addictions in America have changed over time. Our top addictions currently are alcohol, drugs, tobacco, caffeine, gambling, shopping, sex, and the internet. Almost anything deeply enjoyable has the potential to be an addiction. The causes of addiction, much like the individuals it affects, are always unique. Matthew Thomas Mastroianni was born on a cold, crisp December 26th morning in 1985. He had two older sisters, Christy and Katie, and 23 months later, a younger sister, Maggie. That would complete our family. Matt was the first boy to be born on both sides of our family in 32 years. We were so thrilled. He had a totally wonderful, normal childhood. His mom and dad and 3 sisters adored him. His grandparents loved him so. When Matt was 11, he began experiencing dread upon awakening and several bouts through the day. We took him to a child psychiatrist, and at regular intervals, he was diagnosed with anxiety issues. In his preterm years, he was placed on Adderall for ADD. Like most boys, he loved sports, played baseball, soccer, but his passion was hockey. He was an amazing skater and became more proficient each year. Hockey was his life. He sustained a brutal wrist injury in 8th grade and fought hard to maintain his excellence. He began self-medicating for his anxiety around 14 and drinking alcohol with his friends. About 15, he started using ecstasy and landed in behavioral health because the ecstasy had been laced with rat poison. He was incoherent for 2 weeks and then magically improved and returned to normal. Early addictions were marijuana, hodgepodge of pills, mollies, and cocaine. At age 25 is when Matthew had met his match. He began snorting heroin. This was the beginning of his downfall. In November 2013, he was found on the floor of his apartment, unconscious, taken by ambulance to Barnes, where he lay paralyzed from the waist down. He had so many drugs in his system, they couldn't believe he survived. Then a thoracic stroke was discovered in his spinal cord. These are normally only found in autopsies. Barnes had only seen one other case of this kind of stroke in their entire history, that the patient survived following this form of insult. There's been numerous medical papers written about my son's resilience. His paralysis lasted for months, and after a stay at 2 rehabs and being rehospitalized for near-death sepsis, he began recovering. Over the next few months, Matt was walking and normal bodily functions had returned. Barnes had said it would take up to 3 years, but it took Matt only 3 months. You would think this had been rock bottom, but it wasn't. He continued to use drugs through this time period, but not heroin. At different times of Matt's life, in his late 20s, he was placed on Suboxone and did amazing. But Matthew believed it was still like using and took him off the drug gradually. He then sustained a very long, grueling withdrawal period that was difficult to watch. Suboxone is a combination medication used for MAT, or medication-assisted therapy. Other common meds used for MATs are methadone, Vivitrol, and Subutex. The use of MATs has been shown to lower the risk of fatal overdoses by approximately 50%. Suboxone works by tightly binding to the same receptors in the brain as so other opiates such as heroin, morphine, and oxycodone are blocked. By doing so, it blunts the intoxication with these drugs. It prevents cravings, allows many patients to live a life of relative normalcy and safety. During Matt's time on Suboxone, it was the healthiest we had seen Matt in years. Several years later, Matt used heroin again, and I found him in his room, blue and cold, but was able to start CPR and get him to the hospital. He was then found to have 5 cerebral strokes, those are in your brain, and 1 new thoracic, which paralyzed his left leg initially, and then with therapy, he regained use of his leg, but ended up with permanent foot drop, and Matt had to walk with an extensive leg brace. Matt also sustained 30% hearing loss at this time. Matt had been in numerous programs in his life, both inpatient and outpatient, for both physical and behavioral health rehab. He had many psychiatrists, always searching for the right cocktail for him. He would find a good one, and months later, they would change it up again, and Matt actually felt like he was the product of experimentation. The amount of meds that Matt was on was staggering. Matt was diagnosed as bipolar and also acute anxiety disorder, in addition to being an addict. Matt told me once he started heroin, I would never want to be in his brain. that the drug never stopped begging for more, not even for 1 second. Also, the more he used, the high was shorter in duration, and it was all consuming. The reckless side of addiction affects the entire family. The lying and manipulation, those behaviors are difficult to manage. Trust is gone. The incredible cost and debt was staggering. The cost of rehab, psychiatrists, hospital stays, behavioral health, medical care, counselors, support group, programs, medication, the cost of covering his every job so he could maintain his insurance, the car accidents. Matthew was an unusual addict as he maintained employment at all times throughout his entire life from the age of 15. He was very well respected and welcomed back to every job, even after lengthy hospitalizations. Another testament to his determination and strength. Matt was the kindest man I had ever known. He had experienced such pain. He had a deep appreciation for everyone. He had a deep love for dogs and always had 2 at a time. His sister Katie has his newest dog, and we are so fortunate to have a small part of Matt in our family. Matthew was also lucky that he never had any arrests or jail time in his long addiction period. Matthew's addiction transpired for 18 years, with the last 7 years being the most intense, despite his lengthy bout of sobriety. You will do anything to help your child. We hopped from doctor to doctor, praying for some relief from the madness, only to find Suboxone factories and mindless pill pushers. It was a daily battle. We were all in this together, but stupidly believed in his early years that he would grow out of it. Looking back, I wish we had been more proactive than reactive. We were always just waiting for things to happen and dealing with the problem as it occurred. Our lives were swept up in fear and hope, shame and despair. How did we fail as parents? The panic we lived in every day was indescribable, but nothing was as devastating as his death. Matt had a lot of really good things in his life, but he was totally mesmerized by his nieces and nephews. His first nieces, Isabel and Grace, are twins, and he was always delighted to be with them. And so enamored as they grew and changed. He talked about them constantly. They are 10 and a half years old now and miss their uncle with a passion. He was so proud of them. 6 weeks after his only nephew, Sam, was born, Matt had his first stroke. Sam is now 7.5, and he has many fond memories of his uncle. Matt was able to spend a lot of time in the early years with Sam because he was convalescing and had some free time. Sam was his buddy. Matt had pledged his sobriety for his youngest niece, Lucy. He never wanted Lucy to see him as the loser uncle. He was the best uncle. He gave the best presents. He played games, never turned down the opportunity to be with his sisters and their children. He lasted 3 years and 8 days when he was met with fentanyl in what he thought was heroin. He had a terrible week before he used again. Many people disappointed him the final week of his life. He had gone to 2 different psychiatrists and begged them for help with his growing anxiety, and he was turned away. He went to the ER. They turned him away because he told them he wasn't going to hurt himself. That year, since September, due to chronic gum disease, Matt had been having several teeth extracted, and all his teeth had been replaced that week. He stated several times they didn't feel right. He went back to the dentist. He was in pain. He couldn't chew properly. He had gone through this for months without any pain plan. He was so depressed because some of his earlier reckless behaviors in his life, even good friends stayed away. They were afraid. They could drink excessively and dabble in drugs, but they weren't addicts. In the end, the breakup with his girlfriend and extreme anxiety and profound loneliness caused him to relapse. He snorted one capsule where he believed to be heroin, and it was 2 kinds of fentanyl and Tylenol in one capsule. It was enough to kill 60 to 80 people. It was lethal. Fentanyl is a drug developed in the 1960s to help people have relief from cancer and chemotherapy pain. They weren't worried about its addictive qualities. It is a powerful synthetic opioid analgesic similar to morphine, but 50 to 100 times more potent. Abuse of fentanyl can depress the respiratory system to the point of failure, leading to fatal overdose. My husband and I found Matt's body at 11:35 a.m., December 23rd, 2018. He had probably been gone for several hours. His pale, lifeless body with his glasses still on. Every time I blink or try to sleep, I see his dead body on his bed in the next room next to ours. The questions never ended in my mind. The what ifs still not silent. The guilt as a parent has never diminished. The first emotion is shock and pure abandonment. I felt extreme fear. The dread my son used to feel was my permanent friend and encompassed my spirit. We don't grieve for a long time in this country. We are in a death-defying world. People judge his death as not as valid as a cancer death or a car accident. Matt's death is just as tragic. Matt always felt like he didn't fit in this world as an adult. He probably was astonished when his memorial lasted an entire day and over 800 people were present. He probably couldn't believe the first Freeze Fentanyl in its tracks walk in his honor had over 450 people participating. In my mind, however, I felt Matt had been murdered by his drug dealer, who walks free because of no ability to prove he sold it to him. The police held his phone for over a year, and they never were able to break in and find any information. Or maybe Matt just wasn't important enough for them to try very hard. It was such a disappointment. After Matt's death, I felt paralyzed and useless. I still pretend to keep up appearances. I am broken. I pretend for my family. I pretend for my friends. I pretend for my coworkers. I pretend for my patients. Then, by the grace of God, 2 weeks after Matt's death, my daughter Katie's friend met Sarah, who lost her husband to an overdose, and shared with us the name of the group called GRASP, Grief Release After Suboxone after Substance Passing. We met the most incredible, understanding people who have literally become our second family. Our group GRASP has now been changed to SOUL, or Surviving Overdose and Understanding Loss. The group was started by Marianne Lamont, who lost her son, Ben, to a heroin overdose 10 years ago. Everyone in this group has been brought together by loss of a loved one to addiction, overdose, drug, or alcohol use, with substance use disorder and their tragic demise. Losing an addict is a complex form of grief. As I've stated before, some people that don't see addiction as a disease feel these deaths were preventable. This is the stigma we need to erase. We meet every week, but due to COVID, we are currently in Zoom meetings. But they are way more cathartic when we are with each other. Most of the members are parents who know the indescribable pain of losing a child, but members are siblings, wives, husbands, fiancés, girlfriends, boyfriends, and grandparents. This hell cannot be rated on a pain scale. Since I've lost Matt, I literally have constant physical pain. I have unforgiving pain in my neck, and a hole in my soul, which I can seek no refuge. I have lost my father, my brother, my mother-in-law, and my sister-in-law, and love them all dearly. Nothing compares to the loss of a child. It is not natural. I have to try 100 times harder to even do simple tasks because of the drain the sorrow causes. The only time I feel slightly better is when we are doing things in Matt's honor. We have a walk every year and raise money for the Harris House and the Missouri Mental Health. And this year we were even able to give a small contribution to our group soul. I also love educating people in the disease of addiction. I wish with all my heart I knew then what I know now. In the last 2 years, 3.5 months since Matt's death, so much has been discovered. I would have understood more of what Matt was going through. I could have supported him more. I want to scream it from the rooftops. Why? Why my son? If Matt had been diagnosed with cancer, he would have been treated so much better. It is a normal behavior for addicts to relapse. It is part of the disease. But when you give someone pure poison, you have no hope for a future. I couldn't have even saved Matt with Narcan if I wanted to. Narcan is a medication designed to rapidly reverse opioid overdose. It's an opioid antagonist, meaning that it binds to opioid receptors and can reverse even and block the effects of opioids. It can quickly return normal respirations to a person when breathing has been slowed or stopped as a result of overdosing with heroin or pain medications. Narcan can be administered in a variety of ways, but IV is the most effective, and nasally and sub-Q is used more often. Narcan has been giving out at many of Matt's events and has saved several people's lives. I was beginning to have a small amount of hope for Matt's future when he had 3 years of sobriety. We are now left to grovel for the rest of our lives. Matt has 3 wonderful sisters, and they describe their life as a 3-legged table, able to barely balance, having to constantly keep everything on a table that rocks incessantly. I describe my life as I have had some part of my body amputated. I struggle every day to see any kind of normalcy. Grief teaches us how much we have loved. The constant worry and assault of being the parent of an addict doesn't even prepare you for this kind of loss. My son should be 35 years old. He died when he was 3 days short of his 33rd birthday. He should be here. He should be able to see his 3 nieces and nephews grow and mature. He should be at his younger sister's wedding in the fall. His absence is felt at every event. He was our comedian. He was someone who could change the craziest moments into a one-liner that you would never forget. He was an artist. He was a computer geek. He was smart. He had the kindest, beautiful blue eyes. He was always my champion. Matthew knew he was loved. With time passing, I'm scared his memories are becoming blurred. This frightens me. Grief can strike at any time. It can take over at the grocery store, the car on your way home from work, a song on the radio. It's an evil demon that rocks you clear to your injured soul. It's a villain that never relents. There's an uncomfortable truth about the grief of a parent. You are not like other people. I felt like I should be wearing a sign on my back that said, I just lost my son. Be good to me. At times, a brain fog appears out of nowhere and confusion exists. But in the blink of the eye, the ebb and flow of grief can change. Sorrow is always present. When grief is new, you have to take it 1 hour at a time, then 1 day at a time, then weeks. Your survival is imperative. You must be a warrior. You are so brave. Sometimes it just takes courage just to do normal activities, and this is okay. Grief is a lonely companion. Sure, some people are listening, but you wouldn't wish this on your worst enemy. You continue at your own pace, accepting your pain, denial, anger, and loss. It is important for you to network with people who fully understand your anguish. Listen to their wisdom. They have now faced this evil giant. They will help you navigate these insane emotions and tell you are normal when you are facing this horrendous loss. That's why our soul group is so important. Some days, denial is my friend. Denial is your mind's way of trying to lessen the blow. Your body knows you can't handle this grief, so it attempts to protect you. This helps you with your actual survival. This is how I get through holidays and other special events. I don't really think I believed Matt was gone until the 2-year mark. The second year, without a doubt, has been relentless for me. The depression, the anxiety, the guilt, the physical pain has definitely become much worse, just when everyone expects you to be over it. I really cannot believe this happened to my wonderful family. Our legacy is marred forever. Matthew, my beautiful son, you deserve so much more. This poem is by Lily Delon. Giving grief means grief is love. Death ends life, not a relationship. We continue to create bonds, rituals, and connections with the deceased because we love them so deeply. We have to find a way to validate and normalize the lifelong ups and downs of the grieving process. To take our pain and truly transform it towards enlightened joy and giving to others can be our only salvation. Grief changes us. The pain sculpts us into someone who understands more deeply, hurts more often, appreciates more quickly, cries more easily, hopes more desperately, and loves more openly. In the last 3 years, we have lost 219,000 people to overdose deaths. We are watching a public health crisis explode. The need to act is urgent. We need to recognize addiction as a disease. We must decrease the drug supply. We need to be able to provide affordable health care for substance use abusers. We need to steer people into treatment centers instead of prison. If we don't do something, who will? I cannot save my son's life, but I can hopefully save somebody else's precious child so they don't have to live in this pain. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann, for sharing such a difficult story. Our heart definitely goes out to you. It's something we hope we can prevent happening to anybody, for certain. Once again, thank you. Hopefully you'll stick around, and if there's any questions at the end, be able to answer them there. At this time, I'd like to introduce Jody Harvey and Robert Churchwell from the DEA. Jody is a Senior Drug Enforcement Administration Intelligence Research Specialist. That's a mouthful. Shortened to IRS, but not to be confused with the one that comes after our tax money. She's been 11 years with DEA in the IRS department with St. Louis Field Division office in St. Louis, Missouri. She served with distinction in the U.S. Army as captain in the Military Intelligence Corps. She's a former state Homeland Security training officer for the Louisiana Governor's Office and began law enforcement career as a deputy sheriff in Monterey County, California. Robert Churchwell is a supervisory diversion investigator with the Drug Enforcement Administration, 9 years as DEA diversion investigator in Montana, Utah, Wyoming, and Missouri. 5 years as a former DEA task force officer in the St. Louis Division, former narcotics detective for Burlington, Iowa Police Department and St. Louis County Police Department. He is certified as an expert witness in pharmaceutical diversion in the District Court of Wyoming. At this time, we'll let Jody and Robert take it over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellis and Anne. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Anne, for reminding us why we are here tonight. And my heart is full for you and everyone who has suffered because of the great harm caused by these drugs. Y'all, I'm Jody. Ellis, what a gracious introduction. I'm so honored to be with you all tonight to talk about some really important matters. And Mr. Churchwell is going to join in and add his expertise to our discussion as we go along. I do work in the intelligence field for DEA, and what I'd like to do tonight is share a few ideas and details that will highlight our common aspirations between Heal, Stop Heroin, and our DEA agency. Our local and national communities are facing dire threat, just as we heard Anne so eloquently outline and give us her heartfelt story of Matthew. From these illicit drugs and those tragic overdose deaths that those drugs cause, and as well the harm from those who traffic the drugs. We're looking at a significant increase in overdose deaths, and it's more important than ever for all of us to work together and cultivate change and create good solutions. Now, as a federal agency, our DEA, our Drug Enforcement Administration, is responsible for a pretty large territory, and that includes Missouri, Kansas, and the southern third of Illinois. So as with Stop Heroin, your HEAL program wants to do exactly what we want to do. We want to end substance use disorder. We want to put an end to the demand for illegal drugs in our country. And we want to get out the word through the right kind of education, the right kind of outreach from community coalitions and groups just like yours. We want to get and keep our communities involved, and we want to make our communities safe. In the DEA St. Louis division, we basically face 5 top drug threats. And number 1 is crystal methamphetamine, followed by heroin and fentanyl. Those share our number 2 top spot. Cocaine is our number 3 threat, followed by cannabis or marijuana. And then our last drug is pharmaceutical. So we would typically think of pharmaceutical pills in this regard. I have followed this with a few terms that most of us have probably heard at some point. The opiate is the natural narcotic derived from the poppy plant. Opioid, let's just think of that as the synthetic narcotic. And then controlled pharmaceutical drugs, that'll mostly be in the category of pills. We'll talk some about neighborhood-based gangs, the St. Louis metropolitan area, the city, plus 4 adjacent counties, as well as tetrahydrocannabinol, the THC that we find in cannabis that is psychoactive. This little chart here gives us a good idea of what comes from the opium poppy plant. We see morphine, codeine, thebaine, and from those we have natural derivatives. You may recognize hydrocodone and oxycodone. At any time, folks, at the end of our presentation here, we can come back to any slides should anyone have a question and want to dig a little bit deeper. So just a little more information here about our top drug threat throughout the St. Louis metropolitan area. Crystal methamphetamine. We usually find it in a crystallized form instead of powder. Now, y'all might remember back in the 2010s, there was a lot of talk about the local production of crystal methamphetamine, usually in some garage or some business operation with a big garage. Even in the home, we would find those on the local level. As of about 2014, that trend began changing with the production of crystal methamphetamine in Mexico which has by and large displaced local production, not only in Missouri, Kansas, and Illinois, but across our country. It's cheap, found everywhere, and amazingly, it can be 100% pure, meaning what is found in the drug is only methamphetamine. As of 2020, the St. Louis metro area recorded 181 deaths. This is generally what crystal meth will look like in its crystallized form. Now, our top number 2 drug is heroin. We find it largely sourced from Chicago street gangs. And today, that purity, just like crystal meth, is really over the top. To give a comparison, if we look back to the 1980s, we were dealing with about 10% purity. So we can see we've got more than a 5-fold increase in the purity of heroin. We also find, as Anne has introduced fentanyl to us, it has completely changed the way our heroin markets operate in the St. Louis metropolitan area. Fentanyl is really taking over. And for the St. Louis metropolitan area, we had about 90 deaths in the year 2020 from heroin overdose. Now, heroin has many forms. We have black tar. We can find it in capsules. We can find it in baggies and powder of all different colors. This will give you some idea of what it looks like on the streets. Also in our number 2 spot, we have fentanyl, that synthetic opioid made in the laboratory. And again, we simply cannot overstate just how important fentanyl has become on the streets and what it has done to our folks in our division and in our local communities. It's 100 times stronger than morphine and 50 times stronger than heroin, as Anne pointed out. It's incredibly addictive. So it has, we find, replaced again those traditional heroin markets. It is found mostly in a white powder form. We also find that fentanyl is invading what we call the counterfeit pharmaceutical pill market. So fentanyl is being put into pills that are sold on the street that look like legitimate pills that are prescribed by a doctor and picked up from our pharmacy. Usually oxycodone, that generic name for OxyContin, is what we're going to find in those counterfeit pills. Now, the big threat is, of course, when we find that fentanyl mixed with these pills, not only as the sole drug, but when it is combined with drugs like heroin, methamphetamine, or cocaine in that pill form. We also find there's more fentanyl today, amazingly so, in our drug supply chain. We also have more DEA seizures. We also, by not only DEA, but local law enforcement, state law enforcement, and it unfortunately has caused a tremendous upsurge in overdose deaths. In 2020, we're just under 800. Now, our number 3 drug, well, let's look at this picture here. This is the powder form of fentanyl. And some other facts about fentanyl make it even more alarming. We find that this drug is responsible for killing more Americans each year than any other illicit drug. Fentanyl and other strong synthetic opioids are driving this ongoing opioid crisis. And other synthetic opioids like fentanyl have caused about 80% of all deaths that involve an opioid. In terms of a dose, we're going to see a slide here in a moment. Here we go. Using a Lincoln penny, the fentanyl is on the left and another fentanyl-like opioid, carfentanil, on the right. These little white specks show approximately what is considered to be a lethal dose. 2 grams on the left, vice 0.02 micrograms on the right. Carfentanil on the right is basically a big game tranquilizer. Think elephants, water buffalo, and such. It's 100 times stronger and more dangerous than fentanyl. We find now that our number 3 drug remains cocaine. It's a very familiar drug to folks. It's widely available, but it's never attained that big influence and drive that does heroin or meth in our local communities. Now, while it is and can be a deadly drug, folks tend to see cocaine more as a party drug. And here are some pictures of stamped packaging of cocaine, usually found in a powder type form. Cannabis is at number 4. With the domestic production in the United States of cannabis, it is being genetically modified so that what we had in terms of purity of THC levels, say back in the 1960s at single digits, we now are in double digits, and there have been local lab analysis of even about 28% containing THC. Very, very different and much more potent than back in our grandparents' generation. Legalization of cannabis has posed a series of problems for federal law enforcement. Different states have different rules. We find some states with both recreational and medicinal use legal. Some only have medicinal, i.e. Illinois. In Kansas, all forms of cannabis are still illegal. While in Missouri, we just passed the legalization for medical use. So this puts us in a position where now prosecution of these cases will usually fall mostly to our local law enforcement. We also find the new trends of more cannabis edibles coming into our communities. We also find the problem with the prosecutions falling to our local agencies. And marijuana in its different forms, natural, the dried form, the edibles or candies, again, are becoming a super big deal. So our last drug threat that we label in the DEA, deal with those pharmaceuticals. Now, yes, we have a lot of problems with the chronic misuse of legitimate pharmaceutical pills. But what we find in a way overtaking the legitimate pills will be those of the counterfeit pills that I've mentioned before. We find about 90% of these faux pills are seized in the US and have been smuggled in from south of our border. The Mexican drug cartels intentionally profit from US drug abuse by manufacturing these faux pills that contain fentanyl. Now, we also find synthetic opioids in the US can be traced back to source of origin, China. Now, 1 kilogram or 2.2 pounds of fentanyl powder can make approximately 500,000 counterfeit pills. Those could sell on the streets for about 1.5 million. So it's, on the one hand, recognizable why someone would want to sell this horribly dangerous drug to our people, our communities, all for the profit. And that 1 kilogram or 2.2 pounds of fentanyl can easily cause the overdose in 500,000 people. These pills sold outside the medical chain of supply simply cannot be trusted, neither from whether they're advertised on social media or whether they're found on the streets. I think this one rule really applies for our youth, for our kids. If we can get out this message, we are doing a very good thing. If it isn't prescribed for you, don't take it. 1 pill can kill. Now this gives you a good idea. Pills on the left are counterfeit. We see the rough edges, we see the irregular markings, as opposed to the pill on the right. This is a legitimate oxycodone pill, 30 milligrams in strength. It's stamped clearly M on one side and 30 on another. This gives us an idea, if you were to run across it, what to look for in an illicit pill versus a legitimate doctor prescribed pill. These are the cartels that are doing business in our DEA St. Louis division, Kansas, Missouri, southern third of Illinois. The Sinaloa happens to be the one with the strongest and the most historical presence in our AOR. That's area of responsibility, again, our 2.5 states. The New Generation Cartel is essentially an upstart organization. They're intent on outdoing, overcoming the Sinaloa. They are quite violent. And what we find, though, most of this violence is relegated south of our border. It is occurring between those groups in our country that are intent on distributing these illegal drugs. The cartels, essentially, they're operatives in the United States. They don't want to draw attention to themselves. So they do try to fly under that radar. Now, COVID-19, yes, it definitively interrupted business as usual for the cartels, for the drug distributing organizations. But unfortunately, it wasn't enough. That was only a temporary lull in their business. Right now, the drug availability in our 2.5 states are even higher than they were before the pandemic. Now, this map gives us an idea of how those drugs flow from south of our border into our major metropolitan areas. That would be Southern California, Phoenix, Dallas, and then they go through sub-distribution points and eventually find their way into Kansas City, Springfield, and then St. Louis. So the problem with those who traffic these poisons, these illegal substances to our youth, our kids, our communities, these drugs are at the root of most of the violence that we have in our St. Louis DEA division. And that again comes by and large from these neighborhood-based gangs that are responsible for trafficking these drugs. These gangs commit most of the violence because they're fighting over territory. They have a customer base they must protect, and for them, it is at all cost. They typically control blocks and corners of blocks rather than entire neighborhoods or cities. They do, however, lack what we consider a central leadership that we find in other national gangs. That would be on the order of MS-13, your Bloods, your Crips, and some of the organized motorcycle gangs. These neighborhood gangs don't have that. It's kind of like no filter. Anything goes with them. Now, as to the FBI, they track what's going on in the United States in terms of violent crime and homicides. They have determined that for 2019, because of the nexus of the trafficking of these illegal drugs and the violence caused by those traffickers, Missouri was ranked number 4th in the nation, and St. Louis City was number 2 as the most dangerous city in 2019. And unfortunately, Springfield and Kansas City were also in the top 10 for 2019. That's the year for which the FBI last provided information. So there's a whole lot of bad going on, and there's a whole lot of good that we truly want to do. In terms of initiatives, the Department of Justice, under which the DEA is working, these are 3 of our current operations: Crystal Shield, Legend, and Safeguard. As you all can see, we have invested thousands and thousands of man hours, effort, resources to take down those bad guys, to stop the inflow, the influx of these illicit substances. In the US, the drug overdose crisis is a true, clear, and present danger to public health and safety and our national security. These overdose deaths continue to rise at an alarming rate, and they also did so during the first 5 months of COVID. Now, the Centers for Disease Control tells us that more than 85,000 unfortunate souls died between August 2019 and August 2020. That represents a 27% increase in drug overdose deaths from 2019 alone. These represent the most deaths in a single 12-month period. Today, about 234 persons die from drug overdose each day in our country. With synthetic opioids like fentanyl, they're involved in about 59% of our overdose deaths in the United States. Now that means nearly 2.5 times more people have died from drug overdose in 2019 than in all vehicle accidents. Our DEA actions are determined to control overdose deaths by reducing the drug supply, by dismantling, by disrupting, by destroying these trafficking organizations responsible for peddling such poison. Now, we emergency scheduled illicit fentanyl and their related substances back in 2018, and we must have that action renewed by May 2021 to ensure we can carry on this good work. We proactively work with social media and internet companies to identify those who use computers to sell dangerous drugs. We share this information with the private sector partners that we have developed, much as yourselves, and social media companies, to support self-monitoring that removes ads and forums that promote sales of illegal fentanyl. We also continue to pursue the lawful intercept of illegal drug trafficking by internet and social media. And our mission is to completely disrupt, dismantle, and destroy drug trafficking organizations, whether they are overseas, next door, or in our neighborhoods. We view it as our prime objective to get rid of these groups. And I would like to say again that with our significant cooperation, we can also decrease those overdose deaths. And it's more important at this time, more important than ever, for all of us to work together so we can cultivate good change and create good solutions. Bob, I wondered if you might have some comments.
Sure. Thank you so much for the invitation, Ellis. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Anne, for sharing your story. It's always tragic to hear those stories, but it's so important that law enforcement hear those stories, and we can, it strives us to do our job to the best of our abilities. So I'm part of the Diversion Control Division, and what that means with DEA is I deal with pharmaceutical DEA registrants. So anybody who has a DEA registration, a pharmacy, a doctor, a drug manufacturer, that's where my job comes into play. And what we want to do is we want to keep those legal drugs in the closed system of distribution. They're there for a reason. People have pain, people need these medications, and we track them from the time they're imported into the country or manufactured all the way until they're sent out via prescription to a patient. And diversion can happen in a lot of different ways. And diversion is defined by any time that those controlled substances leave that controlled system of distribution. If they're going outside of a doctor's prescription, if they're being stolen from a pharmacy, or if a doctor is prescribing unlawfully or something of that nature. So that's where my investigative team comes into play. And we work closely with all the state medical boards and pharmacy boards. So I just wanted to throw that out there and field any questions that may relate to pharmaceutical controlled substances.
I have a question, and I don't know if this is relevant to Jody and Bob. My son would go to the Walgreens pharmacy and buy syringes, and I'm wondering how that happened. Like, why is that allowed? I mean, he's not diabetic. I just don't get it. But maybe you're not the appropriate people to answer that question.
So I will make a comment on that. So, even though we do investigate pharmacies, DEA's authority is limited to controlled substances. So if you have a pharmacy that's, selling the syringes, or maybe they've got some sort of fraud going on with billing, or a doctor who's doing medical malpractice, but it doesn't involve controlled substances, DEA really doesn't have the authority to investigate those crimes.
It looked like Ann was talking, but she's on mute.
Jody, could you stop sharing your screen so we can see who's, thank you. Okay. Ann, I think you were, somebody said you were trying to talk, but you were muted? No? Oh, okay. Okay. I guess one of the questions that we have is in regards to carfentanil. Are we seeing that on the streets in St. Louis as of
I
yet?
answered, but carfentanil is like kills elephants.
Yeah, as to carfentanil, yes, it's a horrible thing and we don't want to hear about that, but we have had only a few instances that DEA is aware of where it has actually been analyzed by our local crime laboratories. It is not something that is on every street corner. I would say it is a very rare occurrence for it to show up at all.
Okay. Okay, last question. Last question. Okay. Jim, I'm not sure. Last question. That was in response to the. Okay, never mind. Jim Marshall from Cody's Gift said that last question was because we don't have a state PDMP yet. So a lot of that stuff is not monitored. We're close, and hopefully it goes on through. Do we have any other questions? I've posted in the chat box our website, our Facebook page, and also on April 26th, we're going to be doing an overdose education and Narcan training that you have to register. So there is the links for the chat box there. And also, like I said earlier, on May 19th, we're going to have another one of these speaker series. And we're going to have Jim Marshall from Cody's Gift. And let me put his web address in the chat box here.
And I did have a question when you're finished.
Okay.
Hi. My son's psychiatrist was, even after his first overdose, continued to just prescribe 60 Klonopin a month and Adderall and just, and he was an adult and I could share what I had to share, and he's not practicing anymore, but I really kick myself, for who would you go to if I run across somebody now that's having that, that situation. I mean, I think it was somebody at Harris House, had said, let DEA know, but it's such a fine line, I guess, but I just, Robert, what would a parent do when you feel like a psychiatrist? And I don't think he was doing it, for illicit reasons, but he just wasn't listening to, it didn't seem to understand addiction, I guess.
Yes, thank you for the question. So, when we do receive complaints from numerous sources of practitioners who are suspected of improper prescribing, and we work closely with the medical boards or the nursing boards, with those type investigations. If the evidence, points to suspected overprescribing or combinations, if we see certain combinations, and myself and my team were trained on what suspect combinations are, the narcotics and the benzodiazepines, things of that nature, what we will do is we'll usually hire a medical expert, somebody who can actually review that patient file and review that prescribing history, and then make a determination if that doctor is prescribing within the usual course of professional practice. And that's the standard. So any doctor who prescribes controlled substances, they've got two requirements they have to meet. And one of them is to prescribe in the usual course of professional practice. And the other one, they have to prescribe for legitimate medical need. The usual course of professional practice, a good example of that would be if your dentist is prescribing you medication for your back. That is outside of his usual course of practice. Legitimate medical need can cover a variety of different things, from not following the medical guidelines to other nefarious type of illicit activities.
Anybody else? Any questions? Well, I guess if there's no further questions, we certainly want to thank Robert and Jody for sharing their knowledge that they have acquired, through the DEA. We value DEA as a partner that we've worked with for the last several years. And working together is what it's going to take. We got to work on the prevention end and take care of the demand for the product, and law enforcement's got to do their portion to try to ensure that we're not getting it across the borders and take care of the violence because of the drug trafficking and such. We also like to thank Ann. We know that's a very difficult story to share, but I think it helps people. It speaks volumes in trying to erase the stigma that we still have a long way to go on, because it is looked differently. It's not looked like as a disease as it should be in many cases. But we're getting at it a little bit at a time here. We're baby steps, but any work, any progress we make is well worth all of our efforts. If we reach save one life out there, we've done our job. Like I say, we've got on April 26th, we've got our virtual overdose education and Narcan training. I posted a link in the chat box for that registration. And then on May 19th, we will be having Jim Marshall from Cody's Gift, a retired coach who lost his son. And he speaks quite a bit in schools and such. I'm sure that he'll have a lot of information that is worth hearing. So we hope to see y'all. We'll hang on for a few minutes in case anybody has any last minute questions or anything like that. But we'd certainly like to thank you for attending, and we hope we see you in April and again in May. So I guess. If there's no more questions, just like I said, we'll hang on here for a while, but we really appreciate everybody, Jody and Robert and Ann for coming on and making this presentation possible tonight.
Ellis?
Hey, I have something.
Sure.
Yeah. Anne, beautiful job, and what a tribute to your son, Matthew. Awesome job. If I could give you a big hug, I would.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ellis.
Ellis? This is another Ann. I typed something in the chat, but it was kind of late. The question is, I've read that medical profession is examining its overprescribing of pain medications. Can anyone speak to that?
Well, I mean, I think we've slowed that down some. I'm sure there's still bad actors out there. That's why it's so important that we get that PDMP, passed. We're the only state in the union that doesn't have a PDMP. I mean, it's kind of a disgrace, really. But I think that will go a long way, and not only will it show the bad actors that are running the pill mills and overprescribing, it'll also, if used properly, can give an opportunity to reach out to people that we know are having problems with substance use disorder, and that'll, maybe we can get earlier interventions based off the PDMP and try to save more lives that way.
Well, what I've been reading about is the philosophy of the medical profession. Obviously, physicians want to alleviate pain, and their predisposition is to try to do that. I'm not talking about bad actors. I'm talking about regular physicians primarily who don't understand how they have contributed to the problem.
Well, they have, and a lot of the cases is, have to say that the physicians, I think, in the early days were being duped by the pharmaceutical companies, which is where the problem probably initially started. I think you're finding more and more physicians out there that they're being more conscientious about prescribing those. I mean, we can't do away with pain pills. There is a valid need for them, but they got to be prescribed and used responsibly. It just there is a valid, and like I said, there is a valid need. If you do have them, you need to keep them locked up, and if you don't, you need to dispose of them properly. And Jody, and to make sure I got this right, Jody or Robert can answer this, but the DEA takeback is April 24th. And is it takeback.com? That's the website to go to find your nearest place to drop off on the 24th?
Wow, I don't have the website memorized, but I think if you go to our homepage at DEA.gov or Google DEA diversion, we have the link to the link. Yeah. I will comment a little bit on Ann's question, and I think it's a great question. And so in 2016, the CDC guidelines really came out and said, hey, there's a morphine equivalent that if you're prescribing more than that, you should really be very careful. And if you're prescribing the benzodiazepine with the opioid, you need to be very, very careful. And another resource is the Federation State Medical Board. They have opioid prescribing guidelines, and a lot of states have prescribing guidelines, and they really have not so much said, hey, you can't prescribe, the amount. It's about all the precautions they should take with the PDMP checks, the urine screening, the opioid toolkits to, screen for potentially addictive behaviors and things like that. So I think the medical community is working to do their job, better and safer.
I have a question for Jody. I'm hearing a lot about the situation at the border with it being open now, and they're being concerned that so many more drugs are coming through. Do you see that starting to happen here?
Well, bless your heart. That is an absolutely terrific question. I wish I could give you a wonderful answer. What I will tell you is that at every twist and turn, we at DEA have what we consider to be a holy mission, and that is to stop the influx of drugs to our very best ability. So yes, I think the bottom line is that influx is reaching here as well as most points across the country. We have seen an astounding increase, and particularly fentanyl across the country since COVID, if you will, has lessened up its strictures. In a word, I think the only answer to your question is yes, but this is the very important half of that question. We are doing everything humanly possible, just like Ella said, our part of this equation, to disrupt, dismantle, destroy these groups that want to peddle these poisons. So we remain fervent in our desire, our ability, and our commitment to step up and meet this challenge head on, and we will not stop.
I just know it made me feel so sad and so angry.
Yes.
I heard that. I just see the deaths rising and it just went straight to my heart. And thank you for both for all that you do.
Thank you so much. Bless your heart.
Okay.
Jody, I have a question. It may sound a little silly, but it's been on my mind for quite a while. I was wondering if the DEA was in need of anything to help you with your mission that you don't have, maybe because of the funding or because of what other, whatever reason. And what came to my mind is for instance, drug sniffing dogs at used, at bulk mail centers, at the post office and at the ports of entry. If that's something that would help the situation, I'm thinking maybe a national campaign for nonprofits or something to kind of get together and raise funds for, so if there's anything like that you all think would help the situation that nonprofits could maybe get together and work on and help out with, is.
Wow. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your question. I would share with you all, I have come away from life with a 5-word mantra: take care of the troops. And that applies across all of life spectrums, in my humble opinion. And what you are describing is exactly what Bob and I were hoping to convey tonight. We are people too, just like everyone here tonight. We are all people. We all have families. We all have hopes, dreams, aspirations. And if it's one thing we want, it's to make our neighborhood, our community, our family safe and keep them so. What you're describing, I think the only limit is our creativity. What is it that is going to limit our working together and bringing forth ideas that maybe we haven't discussed before? Maybe no one's talked about them. I remember a doctor's office one time, and on his wall he had, "There are no dumb questions." I think your question is spot on, and I think that we would love to follow up on it.
Maybe we can, am I muted?
No, you're not muted.
Maybe we can come up with some ideas as far as that goes. Give us something to work on it in our coalitions, and we'll have to do that. Put a lot of thought to it.
Well, I guess looks like the questions have kind of stopped coming in and that. I guess we'll try to. Oh.
Hey, y'all, I just saw that our own Brenda Shell, our outreach coordinator, she posted what Bob was talking about, the actual address, takebackday.dea.gov,
Right.
for more information on our take back.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Like I said, this was recorded, so anybody that missed it or would like to see it again, they just need to let us know, and we'll we'll get a link out there for them to see it. It was, once again, we appreciate Ann, we appreciate, Robert and Jody. I think it was a lot of information shared there, and certainly a heartfelt story from Ann.
Yeah, I want to say something to you, Anne. I attempt to tell our story as well here and there, and it is so difficult that I can pretty much just keep it to about 10 minutes or so, because I just have such a hard time with it. I am in awe of you. Sharing your feelings like you did is the hardest thing that we can do, but it is so important, and I appreciate your coming on here and doing that.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I spent a long time, and it was difficult at times to put it all together on one paper rather than just compartmentalizing parts of his life. So putting it all together was difficult, but yet cathartic.
Yeah, I know how difficult it is to do
Yes.
that, and like I said, I just have a heck of a time with it, which is why I didn't really want to do it tonight. I wanted someone else. I wanted some new, different stories. And we really appreciate you sharing your story.
Thank you. I appreciate you too. Loss. I appreciate you too, and I'm sorry for your loss.
And same here.
Yeah.
Very sorry for yours.
Well, like I said, don't forget to follow our Facebook page or our website for our upcoming events. Like I said, the Narcan training and overdose education is the 26th of this month. And then May 19th, another Heal Talk speaker series with Jim Marshall from Cody's Gift. I'm sure that'll be a very good presentation as well. So thank you, everybody, for attending. And once again, thank you, Ann. Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Robert. If you got any questions after you get off this meeting, feel free to email us, and we'll try to get them answered for you. If we don't know the answer, we'll try to direct it to the proper place to get the answer for you. Thanks again, and we'll see you hopefully later this month still.
Thank you.
Welcome.